Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm going to be talking about quite a lot of things. And so it's loosely based on the full moon in Capricorn, the summer solstice, which is in fact the Cancer ingress, and I've said elections and executions rather dramatically, but I'll explain as I go on what that exactly means. But before I get going, a couple of things. As you know, I don't do a huge amount of videos. I'd like to do more, but time can't do it. So many other things, books to write, clients to see, columns to write. So I don't have enough time. So I'm trying to condense things a little bit more into videos that cover quite a lot of subjects. But what really, really helps, and I'm sure you know this, is subscribing to my channel. It really does grow good astrology. We spread real astrology by just pressing that little button, and I so appreciate it when that happens. And also in this vein of good astrology and spreading astrology that is sensible, living astrology for this modern age. Then the book that is the first in the series, the Astrology Handbook, Art of Interpretation, is really, really going to help those of you who are just beginning their journey through astrology, as well as those of you good students, but just need some way of bringing all this complex material together in an easy step-by-step program. So, lecture over, let's get going. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the summer solstice. And, astrology really favors, or it follows, the northern hemisphere, if you like, with the idea that the sun, as it enters Cancer, is at its highest point in relation to the Earth. The Earth is tilted towards the sun at its greatest angle. So this is why we get long days and short nights, and why technically the weather should be warmer and sunnier at this time. And the idea really of the sun's full power at this time has a lot to do with the way we interpret things in astrology as well. But rather more importantly, the summer solstice is also what we call the Cancer ingress. And this is a chart set up for the moment the sun enters the sign of Cancer. Now, what happens then at 0 degrees of Cancer? We then look at a chart that we look at for the next 3 months. It's something we use in mundane astrology, in political astrology, and it is related to countries, which is why where you set that chart from, whether it's Sydney in Australia or it's Tehran in Iran, wherever you set it, it gives a picture of the next 3 months for the nation. So in this particular Cancer ingress, it covers a lot of important things going on, not least elections, 2 very important elections, one in the United Kingdom and the other in France. I'm going to talk about that briefly in a minute. But also, it is a crucial period for the United States too, not because they're holding their election during this 3-month period, but because a lot of things are going to be decided at their conventions, the Republican Convention, July 15th, and the Democratic Convention on August the 19th. And these are 2 very important points covered by this period. And it is the reason I called it elections and executions. It's a big dramatic word, but I'll explain that. I don't mean that literally, by the way. It is a metaphor. So let's waste no more time and have a look at the summer solstice, the Cancer ingress chart from the perspective of London. So as you can see from the chart that we have here on the screen, on the 20th of June 2024 at 21:52 British summertime, the sun enters the sign of Cancer. So here we are at the Cancer ingress, 0 degrees, 0 minutes of Cancer. Now, the cardinal points in astrology, which are 0 degrees Aries, 0 degrees Libra, 0 degrees Capricorn, 0 degrees Cancer, are the most, I would say they are the power degrees in astrology. And so if you've got a birthday at 0 degrees of these signs, then you have your sun on a power degree, and therefore you're a very strong solar type. You have a very strong sense of self, and also have much to offer the world from the force of your personality and being. It's a lot more than that, but that just gives us a little brief thumbnail sketch. So at the time this happens, it places the sun in a particular area of the horoscope. And as we can see when we look at it from the perspective of London, the sun in Cancer falls in the 6th house of the horoscope, as do Venus and Mercury. So the first thing we look at is the idea that the 6th house or 6th house affairs are going to be incredibly important for this 3-month period. And what do we know about the 6th house? It's to do with health. It's to do with the civil service. It's to do with social services. It's also to do with education. Now, given that we're going to have a big general election in the United Kingdom at this time, we can see straight off the bat that these are going to be areas of importance under discussion and closely fought for in view of the public's votes. But we also want to look at the ruler of the chart. And since Capricorn rises, Saturn is the ruler of the chart. And where do we find Saturn? Well, we know it's in Pisces, and it's in the 2nd house. And what's the 2nd house? It's the economy. So we know that that's going to be something else that's going to be of huge importance in terms of what the election is fought on, and also how important this 3-month period is going to be for Great Britain's economy. Now, another thing I want to point out here is the ascendant degree, 9 degrees of Capricorn, is in fact the Great Britain sun. Great Britain formed 1066, William the Conqueror and all of that, the sun at the 31st of December, 9 degrees of Capricorn. So in a way, the fact that this ingress chart puts that degree on the ascendant says this is incredibly important for Great Britain's future. So it's sort of stating the importance of that. And I just wanted to pop that in as, just as for your information, if you like. Saturn being the ruler of the chart, Saturn at 19 Pisces, is in fact at this point in time opposition Great Britain's natal Saturn. And like anyone undergoing a Saturn opposition, and we usually get a couple of these in our lifetime, around the mid-40s, and then again towards the end of or maybe it's the early 70s, but wherever we are, we go through another Saturn opposition. It's always a time of assessment, so that we look at how far we've come, what to throw out, what to focus on and build forward on. And when we look at this in the sense of what's happening to Great Britain and what we're looking at in this 3-month period, this idea of an assessment is so true, isn't it? Here we come, we're assessing the success of the Tory government, and we're either going to throw it out or we're going to say, oh, with improvements, could do better, but we'll stick with it. However, when we look at this chart and we see Uranus in the 4th house, this suggests a change of home. In simple terms, a change of base. So here at the opposite point to the 10th house, which is the government, when we're looking at mundane charts, it's suggesting there's a change of government. So I think we could be fairly certain the Tories are out. And I don't want to spend all this time on the election here. The pundits are saying it could be a hung parliament, but I think pretty well we can be sure, even if Labour do not get the majority they think they will get, and the signs at this point in time, as I'm recording this, which is on the 11th of June, the signs are that it's going to sweep the board almost. But I think perhaps it won't do as well as it thinks. But we'll definitely have a Labour government in, and the Tories will be out. And remember, I've talked about execution. And in a way, that is that Uranus at 25 degrees of Taurus. It's very close to the fixed star Algol, which is at 26 Taurus and 10 minutes. And Algol is associated with violent death, but execution, but we have to take that as a metaphor. And I think it also says the head of the government is gone. Okay, so these are the reasons that I'm basing my opinions on here. In general, looking at this chart, I want to just look in general at the idea of what it tells us. We've got the moon at 15 degrees of Sagittarius, and it's obviously drawing towards the full moon, which I'm going to be talking about shortly, at 1 degree of Capricorn. But in the middle of Sagittarius here, it is squaring Saturn at 19 of Pisces. And of course, that means it's also squaring Great Britain's natal Saturn. So there is sadness here as well. Whenever I see Moon and Saturn in a chart of a mundane chart to do with a nation, I feel there is immense sadness here. Why there is sadness, I cannot tell you. I'm not a clairvoyant, I don't know. But there is sadness here. We've also got the sun back there in the 6th house at that kind of 4 o'clock position, in conjunct 150 degrees away from Pluto, which is at the 8 o'clock position in this chart. So we have an idea of the great tension between the sun and Pluto. Pluto bringing about transformation. But transformation can be good, and we can experience great growth and transformation in a way that we appreciate at the time, but we can also be devastated by the transformations that it offers. So we know there is some devastation here in this particular Ingress chart. Now, you can come back to me and I'll talk a little bit more generally about this as well. And this is because, of course, France is also holding its election, very, very important election for France. And it's a snap election being called very quickly. And of course, their Ingress chart isn't vastly different from this one. We have a difference on the ascendant. The ascendant is, I think, 18 degrees of Capricorn. It's a little bit further on. And the midheaven, 17 of Scorpio. A lot of things are the same here. And I think at worst, Macron could really come out of this election very badly. I know he's called for it in a sense that what will come out of it is really putting the far right on its paces and saying, prove yourself. But I think it's a risky one looking at this. But anyway, we'll leave that as it may. Coming back again to the idea of 9 degrees of Capricorn on the ascendant of Britain's Ingress chart, because it's the 31st of December, the sun would be at 9 degrees of Capricorn on the 31st of December, 1st of January. That date is very significant in many, many nations, or for many, many nations. It's the chart of the Euro, I think, the European Parliament. It's, of course, Putin came to power December 31st, 1st of January. So there are lots of political figures and governments for whom 9 degrees of Capricorn is rather important. And it sort of suggests that this particular time, Britain's election at that time is also important for the futures of many other nations. So I'm just going to drop that in very briefly at this point. So I want to come away from that and look now at the Ingress chart from the point of view of the USA. Now, here, of course, we find things very different. We have got Scorpio rising, 14 degrees of Scorpio, and we have a midheaven of 23 of Leo Aquarius. And what does that tell us straight off the bat? Uranus, in the case of the USA Ingress chart, is squaring the MCIC axis, change of leadership. Now, of course, this doesn't really apply, does it? I mean, we know Biden is in charge, and we know there is no change. As far as we're concerned, the only change can happen when we come to the election in November. Uranus in that 7th house position, in a mundane chart, this is about one's partners, one's relations with other people, but particularly one's partners. So we're looking at the USA and the West, really, its partners there. And we're seeing Uranus in there, which says, oh, this is controversy, this is argument, this is upset. Is this to do with Israel? Is this to do with some very great upset here between the USA and Israel? I don't know. It could be. And we're also looking at perhaps other partners in the West. NATO itself, is this some kind of upset and some kind of breakaway or threatened breakaway? We do not know. What it also suggests is with the two conventions, the Democratic Convention and the Republican Convention coming at this time, we may have some great surprises in both those conventions. Now, I know perfectly well, not that I'm a great studier of politics, but I do know that everything is fairly set now. Biden, of course, is the president of the United States. He's the incumbent and will be there at the time of the election. And we are almost 100% certain that Donald Trump will be leading the Republican Party. He is the only contender. So it seems as though everything is set fair. Why should it be different? The trouble is, the astrology tells us it ain't so. This ain't going to be some smooth run to an election we expect. Quite why, remember, we've got that Uranus on Algol at 26 degrees Taurus in 10 minutes, which is saying there is a change. At the very least, there is upset. I'm just going to leave it at that. But certainly within this 3-month period, we should see something bearing fruit from the astrology here. And remember, the conventions are July the 15th and August the 19th, and they are within this particular framework. I don't want to go too deeply into everything in this chart. We haven't got 2 hours to do this, but I do want to point out that the moon in this chart at 15 degrees of Sagittarius is on or pretty close to the ascendant of the USA, looking at the Sibley chart, which most of us use for the chart of the USA. And we're also looking at Jupiter, 5 degrees of Gemini, pretty close to the United States natal Uranus at 9 degrees of Gemini. So we've got a lot of controversy here. We've got a lot of upset. And I think this is kind of reinforcing that kind of story. So let's come back to me again, because, I don't just spend my time going through so many figures that are related to all the different charts. We get very tied up with degree numbers when we're astrologers, and I don't want to get us down a lot of rabbit holes. But before I get on with the next part of the story, which is the full moon in Capricorn, I want to just take a look at something else. So I have wanted just to say a little bit more about Great Britain, if only because, we're talking about broken Britain at the moment, and there is a sense that this once great island, which was the center of everything, the Great British Empire, really is at the end of all of that. But of course, out of endings come new beginnings, and we should be hopeful about a new Britain arising out of the ashes of its, ashes that we see happening in Britain. But I just want to take a little look here at this chart of Great Britain. Now, what I want to draw your attention to is that moon at 29 degrees of Pisces. That's the Great Britain moon, and the moon represents the people. Well, right now, Neptune is at 29 degrees of Pisces. So it's been approaching this moon the last couple of years. It's going to be very much close to it in the next couple of years. Neptune is a slow-moving planet. It doesn't just flash past on a couple of days. It's a long process. We've seen a lot of loss in these last couple of years. We've had the loss of the Queen Elizabeth II. We're now seeing the gradual dissolution of all sorts of things in Britain that were once great, the National Health Service, all sorts of things like this. And we're seeing great failure in our leaders, great loss of faith, I would say, which really applies Neptune on this moon in Pisces, about the people leading the country. The other thing that I think is important here is the play with Uranus and Neptune, because as much as Neptune is on that moon, Neptune is also squaring Uranus in the Great Britain chart, which is saying, hello, there is change, but nobody knows what that change will bring and what it's for. We're just feeling in the mood for revolution, but we have no idea what is going to replace it. And we also have transiting Uranus at 25 degrees of Taurus, right on that natal Neptune of Great Britain as well. So we've got this strong reinforcement. It's sort of about broken dreams, I would say. And this is what we're facing as a country, a sense of broken dreams, of no vision going forward. And this sort of is coming to this peak as we look at this summer solstice, the Ingress chart, Cancer Ingress chart, and the election coming up in this point at this particular time. And I really, really wanted to point that out. And I also wanted to point out that 29 degrees of Pisces, and Neptune is currently at 29 degrees of Pisces, but it's also 54 minutes of Pisces. We are so near 0 degrees of Aries. And we can see from this, from the summer solstice chart, we look back here again at the chart of the solstice, that really for the United States in particular, 0 degrees of Cancer, the MCIC axis of the USA chart, 1 degree of Libra Aries, we see Neptune already involved in some kind of disintegration for the United States as well. And the United States is the great leader of the West. You know, it's this disintegration, this erosion of what once was. We're seeing it so clearly in all these different indicators of our astrology. But you know what I want to say, we can come back to me again, is this idea that out of something that's ending and folding and disintegrating can be a great, great new rise. And it'll take time. It won't happen overnight. But I think everything we've looked at on this video so far is really pointing in the direction of endings, disintegration, exoduses of one form or another. But that paves the way for a new chapter. And I want to sort of end this little bit of a section on this video with that really quite kind of profound thought. So I now want to turn our attention to the full moon in Capricorn. Now, of course, the full moon in Capricorn comes literally 2 days after the sun enters the sign of Cancer. So a lot of the configurations that I've already talked about are the same. But let's have a look at this chart again. Let's have a look at it from the perspective of London. And you can see here that the full moon, 1 degree of Cancer, 7 minutes, 1 degree of Capricorn, 1 degree, 8 minutes. Okay, this is something with my program here, my software program. It's the right time and it should be 1 degree. It's probably a minute off being a change to 1 degree of 8, but never mind, let's just leave it like that. But this chart is interesting because, again, we see how close Neptune is to the angle between the moon and Neptune and the sun and Neptune. It's what we call T-square. And I think, again, this shows just in general, let's look at how the full moon affects all of us in terms of how we respond to the lunar cycle. And I believe there is a response in all of us to full moons especially, but we look at the lunar cycle and, you know, we know the menstrual cycle is the same as the lunar cycle. We can see the tides being affected by the pull of the moon. And so the moon is a real object. It's our satellite. And when it reaches its fullness, we know we're going to feel that full moon intensely and emotionally. So with this full moon being square to Neptune, on the one hand, our dreams are important to us, our unconscious minds, our visions, our instincts. This is a time when all of those kind of things are really at a premium, where we can use the power of our unconscious mind. We can use the power of our dreams to manifest in reality. So there's a lot of things going on in that full moon with that idea. But we also look at crisis points, things coming to a crisis point. And with Neptune, although I just mentioned the idea of dreams and intuitions and all sorts of things that are so manifestly important for us as human beings, the spiritual beings in a material world, as I often say. But there is so much going on at the moment to do with conspiracy theories, to do with lies, to do with, things that are presented one way and they're quite different. Even artificial intelligence, in a way, is a very Neptunian thing. So on the one hand, we see the power of conspiracy theories playing or looming large in life at this time. And therefore, we have to be very circumspect about the information we take in and what's going on around us. But I think also it's the manipulation, the treachery of certain people, the treachery of certain governments involved in lying to the people. I think this chart really does exemplify that kind of thing. That's what we are definitely looking at. And remember, the cycle of the full moon goes on until the new moon, 2 weeks, and certainly, again, coming back to the idea of the election in Great Britain, which will be full of lies and conspiracies and, demystification, all sorts of things that really aren't very real. The new moon is on July the 5th, which is the day after the general election on the 4th of July. And of course, the 4th of July in America is Independence Day. So we've got this idea of new beginnings coming after the cycle of this full moon is finished. So I have done my usual thing, I think, and got through a huge amount of information in quite a short time. And when I do this, there's always a train of thought, really, that I'm going with at the time. And as I talk about this thing and that thing and point it out in the astrology, it sort of supports the theme of the moment, the themes that are going on, and also the experiences and the work that I'm involved in that seems to be relevant to what I'm looking at. And I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, the subject of this video, one of them has been the idea of the summer solstice, the sun at its height, the idea of the sun being at its greatest power in terms of our relationship with it, giving its greatest energy, heat and light. But of course, at that precise moment in time, it is beginning its decline. So we get that whole thing about long live the king, and then the king is dead. We get this whole idea about the great moment of one's peak of power is the beginning of one's descent. And that seems to be such a parallel in life when we look at various celebrities or we look at various leaders, that the minute they appear to have everything is the minute of their decline. And in a funny kind of way, this can happen to us as well. At the moment of our greatest happiness in life is also the beginning of that decline, because nothing can quite match that peak. But that's sort of life. That is the pattern of life, and it is to be celebrated. And if we think about the small peaks and troughs in life, they can happen quite regularly. So we can see this happening within a year several times, a peak and a trough of great times and good things happening, and then not so good things and feeling a bit discouraged about life. They're just small peaks and troughs. We can have much bigger cycles where we seem to be on an upward trend, and we feel that upward trend. We feel we've got there, that's happening. And suddenly everything is happening that's good for us, whether this is about one's relationship life, one's happiness personally, whether it's to do with professional, with goals, with artistic creativity, whatever it may be. There is that sense that one is at the peak of one's powers. One then has to have that memory, okay, I'm at the peak. It isn't downhill all the way from now, but it is important to recognize it. and to see it as part of life. Not all of it, but certainly part of life, that great moment of being at one's peak. So I wanted to think of that. And I wanted to also think about the full moon, which in a way, when we looked at that picture, the horoscope of that moment, we saw Neptune so involved with that full moon. And we think about Neptune at once being inspirational, at really the idea of unconditional love, of the spirit overcoming anything temporal, if you like. We've got that portrayed in that, and that's at its highest expression. But at the same time, what do we get? That underbelly of Neptune, which is about loss, treachery, betrayal, and sacrifice. These are themes running concurrently. You don't get one without the other. There's just not one long tune to Neptune that is good, or one tune to anything in astrology that is one note. It's many, many layers. And I think this says speaks to a lot of us at this particular time of our lives, in terms of what's going on in the world and what we see as so much conflict, controversy, so much that we are powerless about. You know, this comes up time and time again, and we see it. We're reminded of this in the summer solstice, and we're also reminded of it in this full moon squaring Neptune. And it sort of came to me, I think, as I was working with a couple of clients this week, this idea that we can't change our circumstances. Sometimes things are too big for us, too great for us. They're not our fault. They're not something we can have any say over. Although I suppose you could say we have a say in an election, we have a vote. At least we're fortunate enough in this country to have a vote. But I think also when we think about that, it's this idea that even though we don't have absolute control over what happens to us, that much self-evident with what's going on in the world, what we can do at least is manage what we're dealing with. And sometimes the frustration of not being able to get over something, not being able to solve something, not being able to change something, the frustration of that is all-encompassing. What we need to do a little bit more is be able to manage our situations. And if we focus on the management of our situations, we're more successful. And also, there is purpose in the management of situations, makes it active, not passive. And I think in light of everything I've talked about on this video, everything we've looked at, that's a piece of advice we could all share and use to our advantage. We need to manage our lives. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again on my next video. Bye for now.